Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden, and I want to welcome you to The Other Side of History. In the last talk, I gave you a history on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in this talk, I want to again talk about the Bible. But first, I would like to give a little history of Alexander the Great, that war general that's spoken of in prophecy. One day, Alexander's dad, who was the king at this time, he bought a fine horse, and it was for a fine price, a very high price. However, the animal was wild and savage, and nobody could do anything with him. They couldn't mount him. They tried to whip him, which actually made the horse only worse. And at last, the king, he told his servants to take the horse away. "It's a pity to ruin so fine a horse," said the young Alexander. "Those men do not know how to treat him." "Perhaps you can do better than they," said his dad scornfully. "If you would only give me a chance," said Alexander, "I could manage this horse better than anyone else." "And if you fail to do so, what then?" said his father. "I will pay you the price of the horse," said the lad. And everyone around was amused, and they actually laughed. Alexander, he ran up to the horse, and he turned his head towards the sun. He had noticed that the animal was afraid of its shadow. Speaking gently to the horse, he patted him with his hand. The horse quieted, and Alexander, he made a quick spring, and he leaped up onto the horse's back. Everyone expected the boy to be killed outright. But Alexander kept his place and let the horse run until it was tired. Then he reined him in, and he rode back to the place where his father there was standing. The men shouted when they saw that the boy had proved himself to be the master of the horse. Alexander, he leaped to the ground, and his father ran and kissed him. "My son," said the king, "this is too small a place for you. You must seek a larger kingdom that will be worthy of you." Alexander and this horse, they became the very best of friends. The horse would never allow anyone to mount him except his master. And as we know, Alexander became that great war general, and thus his name, Alexander the Great. Alexander's horse carried him through many countries and into many fierce battles. More than once, this horse saved his master's life. In India, they met with terrible war elephants. Long, sharp knives were attached to leather skirts that hung almost to the heels of the elephants. When they rushed through the enemy lines, they were like huge mowing machines. Expert archers were on the backs of the elephants. The trumpeting of the elephants shook the air, even as their huge feet shook the earth. Their deafening bellows changed to ear-splitting screams when they became enraged. Their trunks were used to pluck men off of their horses and to lift them high in the air and then to smash them on the ground below. It was in India when Alexander, several yards ahead of his army and facing the massive forces of the Indian prince, urged his horse forward. For the first time in 16 long, turbulent years, his horse refused to obey. Angrily, Alexander repeated the order. The horse whirled suddenly and at a gallop bore his astonished master back through his own scattered lines. Halting, the horse knelt, as he had been trained to do. And then Alexander was able to dismount. Then the horse actually rolled over dead. Alexander was devastated. He discovered that this valiant horse of his had been fatally wounded in the very first encounter with the enemy. It was said that Alexander's troops, they loved to go to war because they never lost a battle. Well, there was, however, one battle that Alexander did not win. During Alexander's reign, he and his army, they went to Jerusalem. And a battle did take place. not a physical battle, but a spiritual battle. And it was over the Old Testament. This is where the battle of the Bibles actually began. Alexander, he embraced the high priest, declaring that what had occurred that day had been shown him in a vision. And Alexander, he requested the privilege of entering the temple. This began a friendliness that what happened between the Jews and the Greeks. And the Greeks said that they wanted to actually get to know the God of the Jews. The Greeks made an invitation for a number of the rabbis to go to Alexandria there in Egypt, and there to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Now, this was seen as a great witnessing opportunity by some, anyhow. Jewish leaders were saying that if we translate the scriptures into Greek, the Greeks will be able to learn the value of the Jewish religion. Also, the Greeks had assured the Jews that they could hold to their own standards when making this translation. So it was about the 3rd century BC when this happened. And there was approximately 72 Jewish scholars that did actually go to Alexandria, and they made this translation from the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek. And it was called the Septuagint. Though the Greeks had assured that the Jews could hold to their own translation and standards, right, in making of this translation contained many errors and changes. The translators, they were influenced by Aristotle and other Greek thinkers. The philosophy of the Greeks was actually changing the Bible. Today, the modern versions use the Septuagint for the Old Testament translation, and they reject the Masoretic text, which was used for the King James Version. The Masoretic text is in complete doctrinal harmony with the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest, the most trustworthy, the most accurate, scholarly, and pure form of the Old Testament scriptures and manuscripts. Now, when Alexander was given this vision that led to this changing of the scriptures, God stepped in and he preserved his word unadulterated. And today we have these Dead Sea Scrolls, and they prove the purity of this Masoretic text in both truth and in doctrine. Now, there have also been changes to the New Testament. The New Testament was written by the apostles. It was actually probably Paul who combined his writings with that of the other apostles to make the New Testament, and it was written in Koine Greek. Today, only copies of the apostles' original manuscripts exist, but the Christians there in Antioch, Syria, where the Christians were actually first called Christians, they copied down the apostles' New Testament and they preserved it. Now, one such man was a man named Lucian, and he lived from 250 to 312 AD. Now, even those among Lucian's opponents, they admit that there are no Greek New Testaments that are older than Lucian's, and that the great mass of Greek manuscripts, they agree with his. Now, these manuscripts are known as the traditional text or the majority text because they represent the majority of the New Testament manuscripts. All of these manuscripts, they are in complete doctrinal harmony with each other. There's only some minor discrepancies such as spelling or copying the same word or line twice. During the Reformation, it was these manuscripts that became known as the received text or Textus Receptus. In the book Great Controversy by Ellen G. White, she says, speaking of this text, "Now for the first time the Word of God was printed in the original tongue. In this work many errors of former versions were corrected and the sense was more clearly rendered." So the battle over the New Testament, it began very early on in Christianity. And It was actually between this man, Lucian of Antioch, Syria, and Origen of Alexandria, Egypt. Antioch was the center of Protestant doctrine and a Protestant Bible. And Alexandria was the center of what became known as a Roman doctrine or a Roman Bible. Now, Origen was born about 184 AD, and he said that the scriptures are of little use to those who understand them as they are written. Origen was a Greek philosopher. Origen's teacher Clement, he actually boasted that he would not teach Christianity unless it was mixed with pagan philosophy. Origen made a translation of the scriptures, and you will hear today that this is the oldest translation. But remember, there are even those that are amongst Lucian's enemies who say that it is Lucian's edition of the Bible that is the oldest. Origen's translation is a translation of a Greek philosopher. Origen's two manuscripts are called the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus. In 331 AD, they were edited, and there were 50 copies that were produced on vellum, and they were distributed there to the churches of Constantinople. They do not agree with the majority text, Lucian's edition of the Bible. In fact, the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus, they don't even agree with themselves, and they were written by the same author, Origen. In the four Gospels alone, the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, they disagree with themselves over 3,000 times. Remember, it is the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus that has been used for the modern versions. This is why there are thousands of alterations and over 200 deletions. Now, the defense for these changes is almost entirely from the source, this Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. I'm going to give just a few of the changes that have happened, and I will be comparing the King James Version and one of the modern versions, and I think we'll use the NIV. So, in Exodus chapter 20, verse 10, in the King James Version, it says, "But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God." In the NIV, it says, "But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God." So, there is a difference between the Sabbath or a Sabbath. Now, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 12, the King James Version says, "Neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us." Well, in the NIV it says, "He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place, once for all, by his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption." So there is a big difference between these two apartments. Those of you who have studied the sanctuary, there is a big difference between the holy place and the most holy place, and also the ministration that happened in them. Okay, 2 Peter, and this is chapter 2, verse 9. The King James Version, it says, "The Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of punishment to be punished." The NIV, it says, "If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue godly men from trials and to hold the unrighteous for the day of judgment while continuing their punishment." So one translation speaks of a day of judgment when the wicked will be destroyed, and the other speaks of an everlasting hellfire. 1 John chapter 4, verse 3, in the King James Version, it says, "And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God." And this is the spirit of Antichrist. The NIV, it says, "But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God." And this is the spirit of Antichrist. So one translation, it speaks of Christ coming in the flesh, a very important doctrine. And the other, it actually totally removes this doctrine. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. And this is the King James Version. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? The NIV says, how have you fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn? So Jesus Christ is the morning star. We know this from Revelation. It's chapter 22 and it's verse 16. And this is King James Version. It says, I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star. So the one translation, it says that Lucifer is this morning star, and the other says that it is Jesus Christ. And there are many other examples, but this is really a study that you need to do for yourself. And it is worth your time and your effort to discover really what has happened with the Bible and the changes that have happened. Now, the King James Version Bible, it's the only Bible that is not owned by men. It has no copyright ownership. Its copyright is the Crown copyright, which allows it to be published by anyone, anytime, and without anybody's permission. One may want now to use another translation for whatever reason, but my caution is that when you are looking for doctrine, I believe that we should go to those manuscripts that are pure and correct and not changed. So I want to resound that cry of the Waldensian Martyr Church, the Bible whole and alone. So if you have liked this talk, I would encourage you to just click on that subscribe button. And I just want to thank you for listening, and God bless.